If they're not playing with a full complement of high-level cognitive skills to pull off doing well, then it's not a choice.
And I think that's the biggest change in education over the last 25, 30 years is parents used to teach these behaviors.
They might be really skilled in convincing us that that's not true, but it's our job not to believe that.
It kind of falls upon us as educators to do part of that in terms of modeling that. Like, kids don't just come ready-made, ready to behave.
We certainly suffer when they're not doing well, but they suffer more. There was a problem that came up that I didn't know how to solve because I couldn't access the skills to solve it.
Kim Hopkins has spent 25 years working with kids everyone else gave up on. And she's about to tell you why everything your school is doing about behavior is probably making it worse. If you've ever had a kid melt down over homework, shut down during a test, or refuse to do something they're pretty capable of, this conversation is going to change how you think about it. Welcome back to the Supported Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Sebastian. Families often ask me how to navigate the maze of college prep without wasting thousands of dollars and years of time. But here's the thing nobody talks about: what happens when high-achieving kids start falling apart. Not academically, but behaviorally. And that's what we're going to dig in today. That's why I'm thrilled to have Kim Hopkins here. She is a licensed clinical social worker, CPS trainer since 2007, and the director of learning resources and support. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Title change. That Lives in Balance, and the nonprofit founded by Dr. Ross Greene, author of The Explosive Child, and co-host the CPS podcast with Dr. Greene, and has trained schools and families across the globe on a model that's changing how we think about kids' behavior. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So all the way in from New England, right? New Hampshire.
Yes.
All
Yeah,
right.
we're finally seeing a little spring, which is nice. It's been a long winter for us.
Yes. Well, I'm coming down with a little bit of a cold just because we've gone back from snow to 80 degrees like 3 weeks in a row. So it's just insane. Yeah. But anyway, again, thank you for joining us. So, you've been doing this for 25 years and working with kids in residential facilities, foster homes, therapeutic day schools, homeless shelters. What makes you gravitate towards the kids everyone else found the most difficult to work with?
That's a great question. It's a question my mother asked me back in my 20s when I was first entering the field, because I'd had my nose broken in a restraint. I'm 25 years old. It's like, what do you do? Right. And it's a valid question. I just think I always had a deep empathy for the experiences of these kids and wanted to help, because I very fortunately had an amazing upbringing and just wanted to help those who didn't. And I was not trained this way initially. I was trained the way that most people are trained, behavior modification, carrots and sticks, rewards and punishments, and found very quickly that it wasn't helping. So I wasn't having the effect that I wanted to have when I came to the field. I was so grateful to find Dr. Greene's work, and it was completely life-changing, both professionally and personally, to just really be able to help kids and families the way that I wanted to. It's the most effective thing I've ever tried on in my professional lives.
So you said you work alongside Dr. Ross Greene, the guy who literally wrote the book about explosive kids. What's the core idea that most parents and educators still don't understand about why kids act out?
Well, and for good reason, because there's so much messaging. And in his new book, Dr. Greene kind of gets into why there's all this messaging going around and the capitalism aspect of it, right? But we're all messaged that kids do well if they want to. And if they want to do well, they do well. And if they don't want to do well, then they simply don't pull it off. And that it's our job as the adults who care about them to make them wanna. And we make them wanna by rewarding the behaviors we like and punishing the behaviors we don't. And then we cross our fingers and hope for change, right? But that's not actually the case. All kids wanna. They might be really skilled in convincing us that that's not true, but it's our job not to believe that. They want to do well. Life goes better for them when they're doing well, right? We certainly suffer when they're not doing well, but they suffer more. And so really understanding that this is not about getting under your skin or being disrespectful, right? It certainly feels that way. But the root of this is that they are struggling to access the skills they need to pull off doing well. So it's not a choice. I hear that language a lot, like, well, they're just making the choice not to do well. If they're not playing with a full set of skills, which is backed by decades of research, like 60 years of research telling us when kids aren't doing well, they're lacking the skills to pull off doing well. So if they're not playing with a full complement of high-level cognitive skills to pull off doing well, then it's not a choice. So we want to believe that kids do well if they can. And if they're not doing well, what's getting in their way? And that sets us off on a different intervention pathway.
All behavior is communication, right?
That's true. That's
right.
Very true.
I think, I've implemented, I've started PBIS at a couple schools I've worked with, and that's one of the biggest things. Even in a meeting today, I was talking to teachers about, there's such a rush to be punitive with kids regarding behavior, and not that we have a bad school, we don't. But if we're expecting something but not teaching, and I think that's the biggest change in education over the last 25, 30 years is parents used to teach these behaviors. We're now, they're teach how to behave. I'm sorry. Where now it kind of falls upon us as educators to do part of that in terms of modeling that. Like kids don't just come ready-made, ready to behave, but a lot of the acting out comes from not because they can't, it's because some other signals. Is that what you find?
Yeah, I think that in many cases, kids pick up, and it might not be from home, but kids pick up what the expectations are, what would make us happy, and how they should conduct themselves, right? And I think that they would like to ideally achieve those expectations and meet those expectations. And when they're not, we need to think about what is not allowing them to do that, right? What's, kids know they're not supposed to rip up a quiz and run out of a classroom or, scream at their parents and throw a dish. Like they know that that's not okay. And yet, as you said, that behavior is communication. Now, some kids are not very lucky in how they communicate, right? I have two kids. They're quite lucky in how they communicate. They're having my daughter, she's almost 16. She's very lucky how she communicates that she's run into a problem that she's struggling to access the skills to solve. She's lucky because she's a crier sulker. When she's crying or sulking, she's communicating to us that she's having trouble solving the problem, right? My son, who's 10, he's still lucky, but he's less lucky than his sister because he's a screamer, hitter, thrower. Thankfully, not at school, but at home, right? When he runs into a problem he's having trouble solving, we see screaming, hitting, and throwing, less throwing these days, which is great. But that's still communicating, and it's less lucky because we start to get our hackles up a little bit like, ooh, what's going on here? And then, the kids I worked with when I found this model, super unlucky because they were trying to hurt themselves and everybody around them in various ways, right? But all of that behavior says the same thing, whether you're crying or sulking or you're punching someone, that behavior is communication. It's saying there was a problem that came up that I didn't know how to solve because I couldn't access the skills to solve it. It's the same message, regardless of the behavior.
So when, I think this is going to surprise our audience is that most parents listening will have high achieving kids, AP students, straight A's, kids on track for competitive college. They're thinking this doesn't apply to me. Why are they wrong?
I have one of those. I might actually have a budding second one of those, but I have one of those, the kid who's, a sophomore and is like begging us to go look at schools already. And we're behind and this and that and loading up her schedule with as many AP classes as she can. And I use the model with her. Absolutely. Because, well, all kids struggle at some point to meet expectations, right? We call those unsolved problems. All kids have unsolved problems. My daughter recently, we were talking about how she has some difficulty getting to bed by 10 p.m. That is our expectation for her, given who she is and what we see works for her. I mean, every parent's going to have a different bedtime expectation for their kids, as they should, based on who they are. But for her, we find that 10 p.m. is kind of the sweet spot, right? To be able to give her the energy for the next day and all that. Now, if we just, what we call use plan A and consequence this behavior where she continues to stay up past 10 p.m., right? All we're saying to her is, we don't like what you're doing. So we're going to take away this, or we're going to take away that, or we're not going to let you do this, right? All that says is we're unhappy about this. You're not meeting our expectation. She already knows that. So we're not really saying anything. We're not really doing anything. What we need to do is problem solve with her collaboratively and proactively. Proactively meaning not at 10 p.m. We want to be talking about this outside of the unsolved problem. And we want to work together with her to understand her perspective, share our perspective, and then find a way to bridge the two perspectives, her concerns, our concerns. How do we work this out? In doing that, not only will we solve the bedtime issue, we're going to give her experience solving problems. And there's a lot of skills training that happens when we do that, because ultimately as parents, we want our kids to be good problem solvers when we're not around. And if we continue to solve problems for them, they won't get that experience solving problems that they need. And especially with high achieving kids, they want, this is a very respectful model. They have a say, as they should. We have a say too, right? And we're not going to pick a solution that doesn't work for us. We're not giving our power over. Couldn't even do that if we wanted to, right? We're the parent, we're in charge. We're the teachers, we're in charge, right? It's just using it a little bit differently.
So walk me through. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I got feedback. Sorry. I don't know what it's like. It sounded like you were talking. So walk me through what a typical school does when a student acts out, because I think that's important in terms of like, what does the typical playbook look like and why doesn't it work?
Oh, sure. So in schools, what we're taught to do, right, is a kid acts out and then we turn to before we turn to our rubric, we probably do something like redirect them or cajole them, right? Oh, come on. You know that you need to get started on your math quiz. Like, come on, let's go, right? You want to, it's good for you, right? So we try to do that kind of gentle insisting. Typically what happens then, the behavior increases, right? So it goes from just not doing the thing, the quiz, to maybe now I'm being yelled at, right? Now there's an escalation. So then I'm doing something a little more firm, right? And I'm saying, you need to do this. And if you don't do this, you'll be heading to the office, or we'll be calling home, or you'll be missing recess, whatever it is, right? The stick that we're going to get. Often that continues to make things worse. And now maybe the kid is yelling more or threatening or something like that. Depends, right? And now I'm in like de-escalation mode. And I ask this of every school audience that I talk to: who drives into work hoping they get to de-escalate an escalated kid? No one, right? No one. No one's hoping that. Even people who feel they're good at de-escalating are hoping that, because you don't know how it's going to go. Once a kid is escalated, what worked last time might not work this time. We're too late in the intervention, right? All bets are off once kids are upset. But now we're in de-escalation mode, whatever that looks like. And if that fails, if we can't de-escalate the kid, then we do whatever it is we do when we can't de-escalate. Is that clear a room? Is that involve the SRO? Is that seclude or restrain? I mean, there's all kinds of things that are happening. And in some states, we're paddling kids, not in your state, not in my state, but in 17 states in the United States, we're hitting kids. Oh, yeah. Hitting kids on their bodies with a stick of wood, around 100,000 times a year. That is still practiced in the U.S. So that's the typical sort of escalation, but it doesn't have to be that way. As soon as we can predict, hey, last time we gave a math quiz, Joey had trouble taking the math quiz, getting started on it. As soon as we know that, we can predict it, that it's not going to go well. So let's get ahead of it. Let's be proactive. Let's talk to him about it, collaborate with him, find out what about this math quiz is challenging or difficult or isn't working for him, so that we can understand his perspective, right? And then we can share our perspective on why it is important to us, right? So ours doesn't trump his, though. They're held equally. What's not working about it for Joey, what's important about it to us. And now we come to a solution that works for both of us. It's got to be realistic. It's got to meet Joey's concern. It's got to meet our concern, right? And that's a very different way to work, because now we're preventing all that behavior that none of us hopes to deal with when we're driving into work, right? So we're in the behavior prevention mode and crisis prevention mode, as opposed to crisis response and de-escalation, which is just too late.
And like I mentioned about PBS, it's probably the most widespread framework in schools right now. A lot of parents hear that, think that school is progressive. Like, what is your take on PBIS?
We actually do have a one-pager on our website comparing our model to the PBIS model, and we have one-pagers comparing our model to other popular models. But the main thing about PBIS, it can be done in concert with CPS with a few thoughtful points, right? Because PBIS really, as it's derived from ABA, which is very traditional behavior modification, right? It really is about behavior and focusing on behavior. And when they say teaching skills, they really mean teaching behavior, like teaching how to sit at one's own desk and, teaching how to come back in the classroom after recess and teaching how to get started on a quiz. When that's not really our focus is on problem solving collaboratively with kids so they get experience in the skills that they need to be able to pull off those expectations, right? It might be flexibility, adaptability, managing frustration, right? All kinds of skills that the research has shown. And this is not research on our model, although there's plenty of that. This is research, from multiple disciplines that tells us that kids are struggling to access skills. That's why we see behavior. And so the focus of our model is a bit different. PBIS tends to be a lot more behavior focused. We don't think that focusing on behavior gets the job done. Behavior is just the signal, regardless of what it is. So we need to kind of move upstream from that of what, right? Finding problems that kids struggle to access the skills to solve. And that's why they ended up displaying a behavior. And that's our focus. The tiers, let me go back and say that the, data collection that PBIS is kind of famous for, we're all about that. Understand data collection is important, and data is a great way to show kids are making progress with interventions. The tiers, I think it's interesting to kind of divide kids into 3 tiers. We kind of don't think that you need necessarily a different intervention at each tier. Our intervention works at each of the 3 tiers. So in that respect, we're kind of like, do we need tiers? That's sort of something that we're questioning often. The other thing I would say, PBIS is very into like rewards, and rewards are just the opposite of sticks, right? You can't reward a kid into being able to get started on a math quiz. If you can, it's short-lived. It might work for this one, but it won't work for future, right?
Right.
Rewards aren't solving problems. It's just the opposite of a stick. We all want the reward, of course, but that doesn't solve problems or teach skill.
So you're mentioning skills about like a kid, the difference between a kid who won't and a kid who can't, because I think most adults default to the kid is willfulness, right? So what is that big difference that makes between a kid who just can't and a kid who won't?
We don't know. We always say this, Dr. Green, myself, our colleagues, we've worked with hundreds of thousands of kids at this point, have never met the kid who can access all the skills they need to pull off doing well, who just is like, meh, I'm not done it today, right? So in other words, we don't know kids who have the skills they need, but just don't have the motivation to pull them out. I've never met that kid, right? So, the kids who won't, I don't know those kids. There's always something. There's always something behind it. There's always something that we call it drilling. We can drill for information and understand what is getting in the way. So something that I learned from another parent years ago that I love, she said that when she's approaching a behavior, and this is for teachers too, really challenging yourself to think this kid is having a hard time as opposed to this kid is giving me a hard time. It's a whole different mindset shift, which will yield a more productive, gentler, but effective intervention. So I think that's a really important distinction.
So what does it look like in schools that actually teach this, that actually model what we're looking for? How do we move collectively to those models?
Yeah, I think that we're often saying to schools who want to start on this journey, start small. It takes time, especially if you're like me and you're coming from a 180-degree different place than this model is, right? No, give yourself grace. It's going to take time, and start small, meaning, maybe a group of 6 or so people who want to use the free resources on the website. Dr. Green started Lives in the Balance with 2 main objectives in mind. The first one is to give his model away for free. You can go on that website, watch videos, download things, all kinds of resources. Use it as much as you'd like. Pick it all apart. Have discussions about it. What are you learning? What are you seeing? How could it apply in your setting? Or some people like to do a book study. And, the first book he wrote for schools is Lost at School. And that's usually the one I would recommend if you're just starting. And there's a free book study guide on the publisher's website, which you can get from us if you want to contact us through the Lives in the Balance website. But, picking apart that book and seeing, again, is Joey, the kid in the book, like your kids? Is there anything different, and talking it through and just starting to have those conversations about the way we've always done things, the way we've always been taught. Is it getting us where it needs to get us, right? Is this actually good for kids? Is it working? I mean, how many detentions do we need to give Joey before we decide detention's not getting it done, right? And seeing that the more interventions we do that are like that, behavior modification interventions, we're actually pushing the Joeys of the world away, right? So starting to plant seeds, have those conversations, use the free resources on the website, maybe do a book study. And then if you get kind of interest and like, let's dive into this a little bit, right? Then it's about first starting with the assessment of skills and unsolved problems, our ASIP. That's how we sit down as adults and really kind of get a 360 view on this kid's day at school, right? And predict, using that tool to do it, what are all the expectations that this kid reliably doesn't meet? Maybe not 100% of the time, but reliably doesn't meet. What are all the expectations we have here at school that this kid reliably doesn't pull off? As soon as we can predict that, we can get proactive with our interventions. And a lot of people think it's not predictable. This kid is, we never know when she's going to blow. The assessment of skills and unsolved problems will help make the kid predictable. It's designed to do that. It's a really powerful tool. And I always say this because I cringe when I talk to people about a piece of paper and another assessment, right? Because I remember drowning in paper too when I worked directly with kids and families, and I resented it. I thought it took away from my ability to help them. But this is the single piece of paper that, I discovered it 28, I think now, years ago. And I've never turned away from it. It actually helps me help kids and families. So I say that knowing that everybody's got too much paper, but it really is a very incredibly useful tool. So the ASIP helps us to get our lenses on straight. Our kids do well if they can lenses, makes the kid predictable. Now we have a list of unsolved problems or unmet expectations. Now we can figure out what are we going to work on first. Because although this model is incredibly effective, it isn't magic. So if you have a kid who has 30 unsolved problems in the course of their week at school, we're not going to work on them all at once. What we are going to do is prioritize. What are our biggest fish here? What should we dive in on first? Maybe pick no more than 3 at a time per kid. And now we got to actually start having problem-solving conversations with kids. We call it Plan B as opposed to Plan A, which is traditional discipline. Or Plan C, which isn't the model, but is actually kind of useful. That's when you might table an expectation temporarily. A lot of good reasons to do that, especially if it's being driven from the ASIP from the gate, we're like, okay, well, you know what our priorities are. These are the ones we're going to problem solve. Everything else, we're going to temporarily table or do plan C to make room and space to be able to actually problem solve durably with the kid, right? Because we don't want to pile on them. That doesn't work for anybody. And then it's just about practicing our Plan B skills with kids. And we, again, have lots of resources, video examples, a downloadable Plan B cheat sheet, which has the 3 steps of Plan B and the language you want to use. There's another companion cheat sheet. There's all kinds of things we've tried to put together for people to kind of self teach themselves how to do this, right? And ultimately, if folks want more than that, we do offer some virtual trainings, and we do also do some coaching and consultation with school teams who want a little help to grow their skills a bit more quickly, or if they're having any obstacles to doing the learning. So that's a typical journey of a school who's implementing the model. And then things get fun, because once you start solving problems with kids, you're extinguishing behavior. People at the beginning think there's no time to do this, but once they start extinguishing behavior, they're actually saving time. Then things get interesting. And then we start looking at policies and procedures, and are they serving us or are they not? And they're just there because we've always done it that way, right? And it becomes really neat to see a school kind of grow and wrap around and change their culture around the model.
So if a parent is at home and they're having to deal with their kid having a complete meltdown over homework or stressing out over a test, what can they do right now to help get them unstuck?
Yeah. We call this an ask the kid model. Ask them, let them know that you're not mad, they're not in trouble, and it could take some work for you to get there, right? But you want to make it comfortable for them to tell you what the real deal is, right? If you don't, because I always say to kids, if I don't know, I can't help. And I would love to help, but I can't help you if I don't understand. So ask your kid, what is hard about, and I'm sorry, was your example a test, right? What's hard about this test? Oh yeah. Or the homework that you're struggling to do. What's hard about it? What doesn't work for you? And just be real open-minded and listen and clarify, right? One strategy we use, we have, as I mentioned earlier, drilling strategies for how we try to get the information we need. But one of them is just reflective listening and making a clarifying statement. Reflective listening, all that is saying back what your child says to you and then asking them to clarify it, right? So if they say, well, I just don't know this stuff and I don't want another bad grade. Reflective listening is, so you feel like you don't know this stuff and you don't want another bad grade. Tell me more, right? It's not brain surgery. And yet when we're doing Plan A with kids and doing the behavior modification stuff, we're not listening at all, really. So it is different, and it feels good to them to be heard and understood and validated. We have other drilling strategies too, other different ways we like to ask questions. Again, there's another cheat sheet on our website you can print off of all different ways you can ask neutral, non-judgmental questions so that you can try to understand what's going on in your kid's brain, right? How are they thinking about this? Because that's the thing we can't observe. We can observe their feelings, usually. We can observe their behavior, right? But what we can't observe is their thinking or how they're perceiving the unsolved problem. How do they perceive this math test, or how do they perceive this homework that they're struggling to get done? We want to know everything we can know about it, because then we can help them solve the problem in a more adaptive way that also takes into account our perspective on the situation, what's important about it.
So can you give us like a real example of, a potentially smart kid, like a kid that's doing well and basically goes awry, right? They're at a point where they're having a breakdown. They might be having even just a low key crisis. Let's use an example of a high achieving kid, right? They've been a great student their entire high school career or entire school career, and they just reached a point where it's just become too much. The expectations, the pressure, too much. They're breaking down. And you have parents that just don't know what to do. Like, it's just like, walk us through it step by step. And what does it actually sound like for that parent? Like, can you almost coach them, if you will, of how to get a kid unstuck. So it's not necessarily an aggressive behavior. It's maybe withdraw. It's just depression. It's just stuck. It's stress coming out in a bunch of different ways, or anxiety coming out in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, still communication, right? So the first thing I would do is I would try to get a list of all the things they're struggling to start, complete, attend, right? All those expectations we have, like all the different ways that they're sort of breaking down, as you say, like all the things that they're having trouble doing that they used to do, right? So we get a list because we're not going to work on it all at the same time. And then I would say, pick something from that list that's a priority for you, right? What might it be? Do you have an example specifically, or do you want me to make one up?
I have one. So I have a kid I'm thinking of that's a kid in my mind is taking 6, 7, 8 AP exams, junior, senior year. They want to get into top colleges, their SAT score, it's spring, they're a competitive athlete or a bunch of extracurriculars. It's just like pow, 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 pow on. And then, oh yeah, by the way, dude, do everything perfectly. And you should just be able to get through this without anyone actually ever teaching them how to do that. So I guess and so now we reached a breaking point where they just stuck and they just can't. And it has become either like depression, withdrawal, or anxiety, stress. And it's just change in behavior. How would you coach a parent through that?
So if, say, one of the things they can't do, because we like to be real specific, so there's probably several things that they're stuck on and not doing, but say they're just not going to class anymore. And say they're not going to 5 or 6 of their classes. I actually wouldn't talk to them about all of them at the same time. I would actually just pick one. And I know that feels like counterintuitive because we want to solve it all. We want to solve it all now, right? Because we care about the kid and we're helpers. You'll get farther if you just go, let's just talk about science. You're having difficulty getting to science class lately. What's going on, right? And that would be the introduction to a proactive Plan B or CPS conversation with a kid, right? And if the kid says something like, I don't know, I just can't do it anymore, then I'm going to say, you can't do what anymore? Like I'm going to be asking questions. I'm going to be using W questions. I'm going to be doing reflective listening. I'm going to be doing lots of summarizing. I'm going to be doing a lot of trying to understand how they're thinking, right? And maybe we're going to hear things like, an example of something I heard not too long ago was, they're going to find out I'm a fraud, right? Or some sort of thinking like that. That likely is stinking thinking, right? An inflexible, inaccurate interpretation or cognitive distortion, right? That's not based in reality, but that is their thinking. And if we think about it, this model is sort of loosely based in cognitive behavior theory, where, there's a stressful situation. We first have thoughts about it, then we have feelings about it, then we have behavior about it. The thoughts are the first thing. And again, the thoughts are the things we can't observe. So that's what we need to get from the kid. We need to understand what their thinking is. When they think about setting foot in science class, what do they start worrying about? What does their brain start saying? What do they start telling themselves, right? And if they're thinking something like, they're going to find out I'm a fraud and I don't know what I'm doing, that's important for us to know. And we wouldn't know it unless they told us, right? And so I'm going to work to clarify that, make sure I understand that, make sure there's nothing else, because there could be other things too, right? And then I'm going to let them know what's important to me about attending science class, right? Maybe something along the lines of, you've worked so hard and you've come so far and you're making all kinds of progress. And I know that you have goals for yourself. And I just want to make sure that you feel good about, still meeting your goals, right? And now we've got to work to solve this problem, because going with my example, if this kid's negative tape turns on when they think about attending science class. And again, I'm not discounting the other classes, but I'm just laser focused on science, because there might be something specific to science that we'd find out that's different than math, that's different than geography or whatever. And that would all be found out through some careful drilling. But in my example, if all we find out is they've started telling themselves they're a fraud and people are going to find out, right? Then our solution needs to help them kind of pause that tape and challenge that thinking, right? And maybe replace it with something, or maybe come up with like some sort of visual reminder or some other words to say or something that helps them pause that tape. Because if you think about it, we all have negative tapes that kick on. Like I might be in a rush to get somewhere and miss my exit. And my first thought might be like, oh, you're so dumb. How could you have done that? Now you're going to be late, right? Now I have skills, though, that kick in that say, it's an honest mistake. Everybody's done it. They're going to understand. Don't worry about it, right? And so then that tape shuts off and I can still function. We need to find the thing that shuts that tape off, right? So that they can still function. Now, that doesn't mean that the goal is that they continue to do all the things that they were doing and they don't change anything about their goals or anything like that. That's not the goal at all, right? It's just to get our concern at rest. And our concern is we want you to be happy and healthy and keep making progress and learning, at whatever pace that is, right? So, and that's kind of a nuance of the model. A lot of adults think CPS is about getting our expectations met. It's really not. It's about getting our concerns addressed. We have concerns that drive our expectations, right? The why behind it. Why is it important for kids to get to class on time, right? So I think we went pretty far with that one. Did I leave?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, I kind of boil it down to like the lack of understanding any type of structural coping skills, right? So like we don't know how to really work past different parts of stuck, and how we can do it ourselves, but no one's actually taught us how to do it either, right? Like the worst time to teach a kid a coping strategy is when they're in crisis. And usually that's when they need it the most, right? I mean, is that what you see as well?
What's interesting about coping skills, I'm glad you brought that up because I spent a large part of my early career teaching coping skills. What we find, although they're fine to have in the arsenal, they are a little late, right? Because by the time I agree with you, like teaching them when you're not upset, because when you're upset, we don't learn anything, right? But when we are upset, now we're trying to remember that coping skill that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But ultimately, if it does work, it just helps us feel better, but it doesn't address the issue that got us upset in the first place. So to us, it's a little bit late, and we would love to solve the problem that got them upset in the first place. I'm always saying I'm near Boston, so I fly out of Logan Airport. And these days, there's a lot of delayed and canceled flights, right?
Yeah.
It's wonderful if I'm sitting in Logan and I get that announcement. It's wonderful if I can cope with the frustration that will bring and not yell at anybody, right? That's great. Even better, and this is what we want to teach kids, anticipate problems before they happen so you have solutions, so they don't become upsetting, right? So the way I want to handle Logan Airport, when I am booking my flight, I'm already thinking about don't book the last one of the day, right? What are the alternative airports to go into if I can't go into the one nearest where I'm going? What are the alternative modes of transportation if I can't fly? Because I have to get there, right? They're expecting me. And so that way, if I hear, now your flight's canceled, I'm like, all right, I've got other plans. I've got other solutions. I'm not even that upset because I already know what I'm doing, right? And so now I don't have to cope. And that's a little bit of a distinguish, I'm losing my words now, it's getting late. It's a little bit of a different way to be thinking about coping skills than I used to many years ago.
Yeah, my background, I was out of school as an administrator for, like, we did TCI and we did the sanctuary model. So we're always.
I was a TCI trainer.
Nice.
Before I found this.
Yeah. So, kind of like just the escalation ladder and making sure that was coupled with the sanctuary model trial and before practices, but just kids had safety plans. So, I mean, but they didn't always use it, but it was one thing that stood out to me is like, okay, teaching what are your coping strategies before the kid actually gets to crisis. Now, obviously it doesn't always work, but it's at least something tangible. So, I'll end on this too. Before we get to lightning round is that I talk to a lot of kids in meetings with their parents, 504 plans, IEPs, behavioral things. And I would say it's becoming way more prevalent in terms of, I hear anxiety, depression, and then I go, cool. So how are you working through that? And they have nothing. And the parent thinks, well, because it's all confidential, because it's therapy, I send them to a therapist and they fix. I'm like, what's said in therapy is confidential. but you're absolutely within the right to be like, how do I help my kid? Or what are you guys working on? And it's like, if they're not working on anything with your kid, they basically have a license to steal from you. Like when did therapy become no strategies to like actually get kids unstuck? And I see that as like so like there's this mental health crisis. If you can navigate services and get your kids into mental health services, therapists, psychologists, great. But then the second thing is there's a huge disconnect.
Yeah, when we are working with families to help them learn this model, the goal is to have them in the room together. Sometimes it can't start that way if the relationship's contentious, but that is absolutely the goal because the work doesn't really happen in the office so much as it happens outside.
All right.
Outside the
what
session.
Do you actually implement? There was an accident on the interstate last night. I was coming home from an event, and it was just like literally dead. It's like it used to drive because I used to live in DC. Drives me nuts to come to a complete stop. I just lose it. Last night was the first time I didn't lose. I've said a choice word or two. But I just sat there. I'm like, what am I going to do? There's nothing I can do at this point. So growth from me, Kim.
Hey, I'm right there with you.
Let's move into lightning round. So you don't have to offer any explanation, just 5 quick hitting questions. First thing that comes to mind. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. One book every parent of a struggling kid should read.
Raising Human Beings by Dr. Ross Greene.
There you go. That's nice plug there. Worst advice you hear parents getting about behavior right now?
He needs a sticker chart or something comparable, like for an older kid. You need, that kind of feedback because stickers do nothing. They just tell kids what we do, what you did we liked, or what you did we didn't like. But they already knew that. So we're wasting our time and we're not partnering with our kids, and we need to be.
They get kids through the doctor's office, though, too.
Maybe the first time, but then we can solve the issue, and then we don't have to worry.
My kids still like the stickers from the doctor's office. They know they're going to get a shot.
Right.
One thing parents overthink when it comes to discipline.
They worry about what their extended family and their friends and their neighbors think about what they're doing for their kid. And I think, no, your kid and you have a family culture that is different than other families, and that is okay. And, you got to do what's right for you and your family.
How about
the impact of their words. I think that words are really, really important. And even when kids are acting out, especially when they're acting out, we can feel like they don't care what we think or they're being disrespectful to us. And then what we're not really thinking about is like, oh, absolutely, that's not true. And so our words are ultra important, especially when kids are kind of having such a hard time or in crisis, and really do stick with them and make an impression. So, we get overwhelmed and we're not perfect. So do what you need to do to, get your emotional bucket filled so that you can choose your words carefully.
If you could tell every school principal in America one thing, what would it be?
Behavior rubrics don't work and rewards and consequences don't work. And there's tons of research on that now. So you've got to support your team. Your team has not learned to do it a different way because that's not taught when you're becoming a teacher or a school social worker or counselor. So you got to focus on professional development because we got to do it differently if we're going to be doing right by kids.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to come to a close. Kim, thank you so much for being here and making time out of your day. What is one question you wish I asked, but I didn't?
That's a good question. Let's see. I don't know. We talked about so much.
Yep.
I guess maybe why did I even look at CPS in the first place? I really only touched on that a little bit, but something I like to talk about.
Oh, sure. Well, I hope you'll come back again. Let me get into a little more juicier topics. I'll kind of battle you with the PBIS model and my back on it too, but we could do that. And for parents listening, educators listening, where can they find out more about you and the podcast and all the things you stand for?
That would be the Lives in the Balance website, which is livesinthebalance.org. There's a ton of resources on there, all about the collaborative and proactive solutions model, but also all about our advocacy efforts on behalf of kids and their parents and their educators and their providers. There's a lot going on that we want you to know about. And if you can jump in and help, please do. Yeah. And be in touch. We've got the podcast, the newsletter. You can contact us all from that website.
All right. Awesome. Kim, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, Joe. Take care.
You too. Thank you for watching the Supported Learning Podcast. We will see you next time.